Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. Long time no see. Sorry I didn't see you guys yesterday, and I hope you enjoyed my April Fool's video. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out. I apologize for spreading misinformation on that end, but today's video is actually going to be pretty serious. It's going to be just talking generally about the primary results in the state of Wisconsin last evening, and some other surprising primary results out of states like Connecticut, Rhode Island, and of course, the state of New York, which we will talk about a little bit more in depth later on in this video. But last night, there were a significant number of primaries across the country on the Democratic side and the Republican side, and while it's no surprise here that Donald Trump and Joe Biden have won their respective primaries, an interesting story that I think was worth highlighting came out of the state of Wisconsin, in which Donald Trump received less votes than Joe Biden in this primary. Now, first things first, the Democratic and Republican primaries, as of today, are not competitive. They are not at a point where there needs to be excessive turnout by any metric, and this won't determine the future of our country or the future of who the nominees will be, at least contained to where they are now. And that's because Democrats have already nominated Joe Biden. Republicans have already nominated Donald Trump. But the unique point of interest here, for me at least, is the fact that Donald Trump received just 79% of the vote in the Wisconsin Republican primary and less raw votes than Joe Biden. And the reason why I find that to be significant is, number one, because Wisconsin is a state that overall had more Republican turnout than it had Democratic turnout. More Republicans came to the ballot box to vote in this election than Democrats did. And while an initial stance that might seem like it's good news for Republicans, when you see who they're voting for, you actually start to paint a different picture. Because although Joe Biden got just 89% of the vote in Wisconsin, that's certainly better than 79%, especially after both nominees have already been declared. And a large reason for this was because 20,000 voters voted for Ron DeSantis, and 77,000 voters voted for Nikki Haley. The point being, there's a considerable amount of voters that are upset with the with the Republican Party, with Donald Trump being the nominee, enough to a point where they're voting for other candidates here, with 12,000 voting uninstructed, which is similar to none of the candidates above. And so when I look at this, I really, call into question, is it just that Nikki Haley had surprisingly, a strong performance in Wisconsin relative to some of the other states? Maybe this was, a state where she was uniquely powerful and we're seeing the residual effect of that. And the answer is really no. In Rhode Island, she got around 11% of the vote. In Connecticut, she got around 14% of the vote. In New York, she got around 13% of the vote. It was pretty traditional, but that means it's a red flag. New York in specific also has a closed primary, meaning party members that are, only registered Republicans are the only ones allowed to vote in the GOP primary, which means there was no meddling from independents or Democrats or people who was generally anti-Trump that were not traditionally voting Republican, nor did they affiliate as such. And so what it shows here is that Donald Trump, roughly 18% of the party in New York, is in opposition to Donald Trump being the nominee, despite being the overall expected winner. And I think what we've seen more on the end of the Democratic Party is that all of these articles, all of this discussion around the uncommitted campaign, the unintended campaign, whatever it might be, depending on what state you're looking at, uninstructed, not unintended, is that Joe Biden is in a weak position. That's really what the narrative has been. That because there existed these, protest votes against the president, it all of a sudden meant that the Democratic base was, far and removed. And that's not the case. At least it can't be the case if the same people are building a narrative that Donald Trump wins Wisconsin Republican primary by, 60 points, trounces, next place candidate. Sure, maybe that can be the takeaway. But we know, at least on our end, that at the end of the day, the Wisconsin primary here does give us something. The New York closed primary does give us something. In the same way, it gave us something before, when you looked at Florida's closed GOP primary, when we looked across the country in suburban areas where Donald Trump performed the worst. It was telling us a story and showing us the regions of states, the regions of this country, that Donald Trump would likely perform the least well in this coming November. And I think it is alarming that Joe Biden was able to receive more votes in Wisconsin, despite there being no hype, no intentionality behind this Democratic primary campaign here, to the extent that there wasn't even a prominent Democrat running for president against Joe Biden. Wisconsin has been this Democratic primary where there has been no conversation, no discussion, and the same cannot be said on the Republican side. And so the fact of the matter is, despite the primary in Wisconsin having more Republican turnout, Donald Trump received less votes. And in a state like this one, every single vote matters. Take a look at how it voted on the presidential in the last election. Joe Biden received 49.4% of the vote. Donald Trump received 48.4%. When you take a look at the actual raw vote here, you find that in Wisconsin, Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden by 20,000 votes. The Republican vote against him in the 2024 primary, nearly 100,000. And so I look at this and say, in fact, actually more than 100,000. But Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley combined are just shy of 100,000. This is a sign here. While Joe Biden may have lost around 60 to 70,000 votes, the entirety of the narrative has been that Joe Biden has lost Democratic support and Donald Trump has not lost Republican support, when I really don't think that is the case. There are voters out there that have voted for Trump twice that will not vote for him again. There are voters out there that said, I will vote for Biden in 2020, but voted for Trump in 2016. And this time around are making a decision saying, had it been Nikki Haley, had it been Mike Pence, had it been Ron DeSantis, I would have voted for them. But we know now that since it is Donald Trump, they aren't going to make that decision. And so it even gets to a point where in a protest vote, they turn out in a primary against Donald Trump. And that's good news for Biden. I will also say Wisconsin is just one part of this big story. That in the state of New York, Donald Trump received 82.1% of the vote. Okay. I really didn't expect there to be a significant difference, or improvement for Republicans in New York. New York is a solid Republican state. It's not a swing, it's a Democratic state. Sorry. It's not April Fool's anymore. This is a state the Democrats routinely win by 20, 25, 30-point margins, which means that we really shouldn't be looking at turnout as an indicator. And so maybe that's not what we look at. But what we look at is the percentage. What we also look at, too, is that in these battleground districts, where the districts are more evenly split, more similar in ideology to Wisconsin, we find here that Democrats nearly trounce Republicans in all of them. Keep in mind, neither primary was competitive. Neither primary had major investments from Democrats or Republicans. This just seems to be where the default level of enthusiasm is, as it was in Wisconsin, in favor of the Democratic Party. But unlike, Wisconsin in totality, Republicans, in fact, did not have a higher raw vote number. But in terms of percentages here, this is what matters. Because in every competitive district, except for New York's 1st district, you find here that Biden did better than Trump. These are evenly drawn districts. Many of them are districts that were Biden +1, Trump +1. And the fact of the matter is, Biden received significantly more votes in all of them, and it's not because the Biden campaign wanted to win New York. They did not put in an effort to win this state. The Biden campaign has been absent from the primary trail for a reason, because they know it's a done deal. The nominations have already been secured, and that's where we're at. There is no concern here that Joe Biden will not be the nominee, just as there is no concern that Donald Trump will not be the nominee. And so when we look at this, it tells us an interesting story. That the enthusiasm that supposedly is eroding from the Biden camp, that is moving to the Trump camp, doesn't seem to be translating to election results. This entire election seems to be more centered around vibes than it actually is about data. More centered around obscure polls than it is about special election and midterm election data. This election, I think, when you look at it strictly from the far and few, elections that we've had between 2022 and now, or honestly, between the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, the leak in May, the decision in June, those midterms, the special elections between, the 23 off-cycle year, the special elections between then and now, like New York's 3rd, where Biden got 59.5% of the vote in total, right? And so this is really interesting. You're finding here that Biden is significantly outperforming Donald Trump. But you wouldn't believe it if you looked at just what the polls were telling you. If you looked at just what the vibes were saying about the race, about anecdotal evidence about people from the border that are switching over to the Republican Party because of the immigration crisis, or people outside of Philadelphia that are not voting for President Biden or any Democrat for that matter because they're upset about issues like healthcare, and that Biden hasn't done enough for certain communities, which means they won't vote for him. And while there certainly is a major concern in some of these states, Wisconsin does not seem to be one of them. I think the concerns are more, found in states like Michigan, for instance, where it is absolutely a major concern that the Dearborn community will not turn out for President Biden, because the uncommitted vote there was significantly higher. You also found that, it was a problem. It was and continues to be an issue that President Biden has not won over Arab American voters on in this country. You see it also, again, while there is a lot of it being relayed based on vibes, there certainly are data points that tell us that in some states, the Biden campaign will struggle more than they did in 2020. That is a given and a guarantee, hands down. But in these states in specific, in the New York congressional districts, in the state of Wisconsin, I don't know if I agree. Because I don't think that this country votes in a monolith. I don't think that swing states do either. And as much as I would like for the blue wall to be what exactly that is, vote in a block. Either it's going to go for Trump or it's going to go for Biden. It would just look prettier on the map. I don't know if that's actually going to be what happens here. Because Wisconsin, I think, and Pennsylvania have shown us more recently that they are much more friendly to President Biden than the state of Michigan. That might be shocking, because Michigan was the narrowest state that Trump won in 2016. The state that voted for Hillary the most, essentially, out of those three. The state that voted for Biden the most out of those three in 2022. And the state that elected a Democratic governor, a Democratic state Senate, a Democratic state House, and won over almost all of the competitive House districts in 2022 in the state of Michigan. Democrats did well there. And yet today, it stands as the state that Donald Trump himself has the best performance in. Not Wisconsin, which he won in 2016 by the largest margin out of the three, and almost won in 2020. Biden won Michigan by 3. Trump lost to Wisconsin by 1. In Pennsylvania, you see that Donald Trump leads here by 0.6. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are similar in demographics, similar in terms of issues that matter to the voters here. And it's very interesting because they seem to be replicating each other. And I think what we've seen from early data in Pennsylvania, what we've seen pretty consistently over the past few months too from that state, is that Biden does well there as well now as the state of Wisconsin. And I think it is big news. I think this goes to show that the Biden campaign has enthusiasm. The Biden campaign has turned out a base even in races where it really, really, really does not matter. Because that's what matters here. Just getting out your base and having them being excited enough to vote for you in a non-competitive primary. And if they're turning out more for Biden than they are for Trump, I think it does dispel a major, weird understanding about this race that does not seem to be grounded in reality or election data. And so I'd caution you in making any, broad generalizations about the state of the race as where we are right now. I think that's the one thing that pundits are going to look back in this race and say, we did that wrong, because they went off vibes and strictly polling data instead of fundraising numbers that Biden is pulling in across the country. Primary voting data numbers, special election numbers, where you saw recently George Santos' seat flip to the Democrats by 8 percentage points. The Alabama seat, where IVF is a very, very prominent issue here, you saw Democrats swing that district 25 points to the left. There is a winning strategy here, and the Biden campaign does have a pathway to victory. And based on these numbers alone, it's clear how it happens. It happens in Wisconsin. It happens in Pennsylvania. It happens by reversing the trends in Michigan. And what that means, too, in terms of what the data we're seeing right now with this overperformance in the state of Wisconsin, is that we're also seeing it translate to other states. We're seeing it translate to battleground districts. That if this was to be the House election results in 2022, New York's first is held by Republicans. Chances are it probably will be based on these numbers. But the fourth is a GOP district. If it flips, Democrats are going to be worried. Republicans are going to be worried. When you take a look at the 17th district here, this is currently held by Republicans. Joe Biden got roughly 62% of the vote in that district. The 18th is held by a Democrat. The 19th, 56% for Democrats. Republicans led there by 1.6 in the 2022 midterms. And in New York's 22nd, Biden pulls ahead in a in a Republican Party district. And so with this being said, you would have Democrats have already flipped a House seat in the 3rd district, so they would get 4 more and they would have back House control. If these numbers were to be, stamped on the certification of the 2024 election, Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries would be in leadership next year. We would have a speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, in the United States House of Representatives if these results were holding true. And so I think that's the major problem here, that these primaries are often early indicators about enthusiasm and support, and the mainstream media narrative just seems to be so far off from what actually is happening in reality. And I think that's why we have to be cautious about how we analyze elections, how we treat them, how we predict them. And I think that's why these races are really, really hard to predict, because you see numbers like the ones in Real Clear Politics that show Biden losing, but then you see other numbers that show him winning. So time will tell who's right, who's not, what to look at for future elections. But based on this Wisconsin primary, I'd say Democrats are actually in a better position than they otherwise might think. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.